So, hello, I will be explaining some parts of our presentation and then some quick queries about the research itself. Please read through the material that I provided before our meeting tomorrow. We will have individual presentations, which I will proctor and panel. I will be asking you questions about particularly the statistics and the data gathering procedure. So let's just begin. So in the first page, we look into the microplastic situation as a whole. This is our background, basically. So what I provide here is a graphical abstract of the microplastic contamination in fisheries products, particularly or specifically Canos canos. This is the scientific name of bangus. So this is also a local study which pretty much establishes that the Philippines has microplastic contaminations within its oceans and its aquaculture and fisheries industry, in which actually 97% of bangus have microplastics within them, which is a very alarming thing. And then after you click this, actually, you'll have another graphical abstract. And this one is what I use to establish the globalization or, kumbaga, how widespread microplastics are, especially local, especially in terms of locale. Sorry, and I'm basically killing two birds with one stone in this slide because you're also looking at the health effects of microplastics. This is all in the same slide, by the way. And if you click it again, you will see the bioaccumulation of microplastics in human brains. So I'm basically going through varying degrees of how these things affect us. Kumbaga. So after that, we have the slide 2 here, or slide 3 in terms of arrangement. Uh, First is we're looking into the theoretical framework here. So we can actually um, mention everything pretty much about our scope and what we're trying to study. So this the second slide, or the third slide, rather, is focusing on the scope and our theoretical framework. So we're looking into two things here as well. So in terms of the scope, we just have to mention that we're studying three main variables, which is QG, QK, and QA. And then the next is we're also looking into, the theoretical basis of the entire research. And then after that, next slide is going to be the research questions. This is going to be read in verbatim. And then the methodology used in the study. So this is also an appeared upon click type of slide. So when discussing the research design, it's going to be cross-sectional survey. When discussing the sampling technique, it's going to be quota sampling via snowballing, voluntary response, and it's also important to mention that through voluntary response, we try to minimize the bias through a raffle, okay? And then convenience sampling. And then for the respondents, also mentioned that we have a 6% margin of error at 95% confidence with a sample size of 278 stratified per municipality. It's very important. And you also have the instrumentation, which is an adaptation. So ADA, adaptation with an A. From three primary authors, we have Asmi et al., Omowajowo et al., and Dawara et al. And our instrumentation specifically measures attitudes, knowledge, and demographics. So this next slide is going to be the results already. So the first one is going to show you the descriptives. Or sorry, this is not the slide pala. Sorry, my mistake. This is going to be your data. This is going to be our data analysis process for the slide. So upon clicking, you will see research question 1 and then research question 2 and then research question 3. In research question 1, we are asked to measure attitudes and knowledge levels. So this is pretty general. So we're going to be using descriptive statistics. And this is also going to involve our testing for normality so that we can use it for inferential statistics. So be sure to have a clear distinction of descriptive and inferential statistics. And then RQ2, which is to measure the relationship of attitudes and knowledge scores, which is non-parametric inferential statistics using Spearman rank correlation and linear regression. Again, regression is for calculating for the regression coefficient, is what we call it. And the regression coefficient is basically the beta symbol. And then we have RQ3, which is the measuring the relationship of demographics to knowledge and attitudes, which uses ANOVA and multilinear regression. So this is going to be the results for now. We have the descriptives. So when mentioning the descriptives, you also have to mention that we have a relatively high score of 28.2 and 48.4, exceeding 50%, or the average percentile. And then we also calculate for Shapiro-Wilk W value, Shapiro-Wilk P value, Kolmogorov-Smirnov D value, and Kolmogorov-Smirnov P value. So these are our ways of measuring normality, aside from the QQ plot that you can also mention that is included in our paper when testing for normality, okay? And also when discussing this slide, you have to make sure that you also mention the maximum value for QK and QA. And when asked for the proportion of these things, mention importantly that we use the what we call min-maxing or normalization of data so that the proportion of both scores are equal to each other or proportional to each other, kumbaga. The next slide involves the correlation analysis, which is the Spearman coefficient of 0.424 and P is less than 0.001, indicating a strong positive relationship because of positive 0.424 and attitudes to knowledge. So this is going to represent our ANOVA testing, which is going to be box plots. So ANOVA is basically measuring the difference of means. And in box plots, you can illustrate the means. In reading box plots, you can literally just look at the lower side of the box, or the quadrilateral in this case. And the lower end is going to be your lowest value or lowest score. And then the higher side is going to be the highest score within that certain demographic. And then yung line dito is representing the mean. So we focus on two particular box plots. The first one is the box plot for education level as the categorical variable with respect to attitudes and knowledge levels. So in this case, I actually draw a line here in vocational education in which we see that vocational education people perceive their or their self-assessment of their knowledge levels and attitudes are way higher than those of postgraduate bachelor's degree and basic education respondents. So when discussing the multilinear regression line, we have multiple variables to discuss here, which is QA, or sorry, yeah, okay. So we have QA sub I, which means for every QA value of each respondent. So I is basically the respondent per respondent for individual um, score. And then we have a constant intercept of beta 0 and the beta 1 for the variable QK for an individual. And then we add that to the summation of the QG variables for individual depending on their subgroup. So basically we calculate for this means that we're calculating 4 regression lines because we have 4 QG values or 4 QG factors, sorry. So the right term when mentioning it is QG factors. And then within those factors, we have multiple subgroups involved. So yung subgroups na yun is what J represents. So instead of showing the regression itself, we show the difference of the regression coefficients. So what this means is that your regression coefficients is how much a certain value will change in QA with respect to QK, or with respect to certain factors actually. So our primary factor here is QK, and then we have multiple regression predictors here, which is gender, education, age group, and municipality. So what this means is that we're looking at how much it changes depending on a baseline value, and we look at 0.0 as the primary coefficient in this case, or the elementary basis of the coefficient. So in layman's terms, we're basically looking at how much a certain variable or certain characteristic of the demographic affects or predicts their attitude scores. So as you can see, QK has the highest score of prediction on QA summation, and it's actually quite evident as the only thing that can significantly predict QA. As you can see in comparison, the other demographic characteristics have little to no or even negative prediction of QA, particularly that in basic education and postgraduate level education, with vocational education being one of the highest in the group. So we also have our conclusions here. You can read this verbatim, but I also highly recommend that you also expand on it. And then we have for future researchers, this is going to be the recommendations section of the slides. And then after this is going to be the references. So again, if you have any questions regarding the actual slides or actual paper itself,